Welcome to Girl Call Me with Tanya,
And Jessica,
the podcast where Black women's voices shine.
come for the empowerment and storytelling and stay for the sisterhood.
Girl Call Me with Tanya and Jessica's new episodes every Wednesday, everywhere you get podcasts.
Head over to girlcallme.com to find out all the ways we can continue the conversation together. Hi, welcome to Girl Call Me.
Yes, my favorite day, Wednesday. I was like, nah. So, anyway, we are super excited. Depending on how things happen in the last week, we might need this conversation more than ever, but we are grateful to have Kaela Farrise with us. It's basically, in some ways, a continuation of our conversation that we had a couple weeks ago, in which we realized that I might struggle with the word no. And Jessica, well, she ain't met anybody she couldn't say yes to. So we realized then that we needed some real help. And so we're grateful to have Kaela with us. Kaela is a licensed marriage and family therapist, a PhD student in clinical psychology, and the founder of Therapy While Black. And I'll say that is how we found her on social media, because we were following her and her amazing content. And we were like, we need her on the show. She's an organizer dedicated to reducing mental health stigma in the Black community. She holds a bachelor's degree from Stanford University and a master's degree in clinical psychology from Antioch University. As a researcher and as a clinician, her work focuses on trauma and its aftermath in families of color and the implementation of culturally responsive mental health care. So this is so on point, and this is so important as we welcome Kaela to the Girl Call Me Mike. Welcome, Kaela.
Welcome.
Happy to be here. Thank you.
I want to just acknowledge that I said this last episode, but I was really thinking that boundaries was going to be an episode for Tanya. And then quickly turned out that I have none. I mean, it didn't turn out. I knew that, but I guess I was exposed is more of what I should say. But I thought it'd be fun if we just started, put fun in quotes, to just get your thoughts, Kaela, on like when you listened to our boundary episode, did anything stand out for you and maybe make us feel like, not as bad about where we entered and exited the conversation?
I feel good, but it's okay.
I think we can take from that, for one, that everyone is on their own boundaries journey.
Yes.
And setting boundaries, like most things, exist somewhere on a spectrum in terms of when you use them, how you use them, who you use them with. And you two gave, two great examples of perhaps different challenges that people are working through.
Right.
In terms of things that stood out, I think one of you, and I don't remember which one of you talked about noticing that people, I think it was like people twist themselves, kind of fall over themselves, all of the things to kind of avoid setting at least direct boundaries. And that really stood out to me. People have a lot of feelings about boundary setting, as we are seeing here, right, in this little snippet of conversation, as we saw last time in the podcast. You use the word boundaries and it brings up a lot of feelings for people, some maybe positive, some negative, but it's not one of those things that really is feelings neutral for almost anyone. So just wanted to validate that, yes, we are all on a journey, including myself, and that is one of the major things that I end up kind of working with people on, but also just talking with folks, and especially like in my group therapy work, that idea that like if you are not setting an appropriate boundary, it is not neutral, right? Like you are having feelings about it either way, or there are feelings somewhere in this system. And if we just, don't do the thing or act like, we're not going to do the thing, like there are still feelings. The feelings are still there. Somebody has them. It's usually you. So yeah, I often say to clients who are worried about kind of making someone else uncomfortable, just like, you are choosing your own discomfort then, right? And not setting the
Yes.
boundary. Someone is going to be uncomfortable perhaps
Right.
in this scenario. It doesn't always have to be you.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
I love that. One of the things we try to define boundaries, but I
Mhm.
would love us to take a step, a beat back, and love to hear how the many ways that people can define and the many ways that people can struggle with boundaries.
Mm. Yeah, I loved the framework that y'all used because it was so all-encompassing in terms of the types of things that you might set boundaries around, whether that be physical, whether that be emotional. I might push back a little bit against that first part of what you said,
Mm.
which is that I think it was like boundaries are about how people treat us and like how we want to be
Yeah.
treated. I and this is not, I did not make this up, but I heard it from someone. The difference between rules and boundaries I think is really important. So boundaries being really focused on myself, what I can control, sure how I want to be treated, right? But not in terms of like what other people are doing, but in terms of what I am willing to do or not do, how I am
Mm.
willing to engage or not engage, versus a rule would be perhaps something that you set for someone else and their
Mhm.
behavior, or how they are engaging with you. And I think that's somewhere where people get really caught up, especially when we get like kind of on the beginning pieces of this boundary journey, is like we start setting rules left and right for how
Mm.
other people are going to engage and treat us, and we can make those requests, but we have no power or control in the follow through.
Right.
And so people get really upset
Mm.
or feel really kind of disregarded because the focus isn't maybe on the right person.
Yeah, that I love because it's like we do get caught up, and probably it's like the pop culture piece of like therapy where
Absolutely.
everyone's like, I know what boundaries is because I saw an Instagram like post that someone created in Canva, and it's like that's it. But I
Hmm.
think that the rules is really interesting because I think I'll speak for myself. It's probably easier for me to set a rule for someone else than it is for me to set a boundary for myself. So, for example, me saying to
Hmm.
Tanya, "You're not allowed to text me about political stuff in the week leading up to the election," I should actually probably be saying, "You can do whatever you want, girl. Like, I'm not making rules for you. I'm not responding to you." Or you're
Right.
silenced,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. And I think it's can be more difficult because it requires identifying what our need is.
Yes.
Like, what is the thing that I actually need to be happening here? Versus, yeah, what is the thing that I don't like? What's the thing that's triggering me, right? Because we can identify that pretty readily. Like, oh, I didn't like that. That didn't feel good. But why? What do I need from this? How could I state this as a positive thing? As in, here's what I'm going to do. Here's what I need you to do. Versus,
Right.
don't do this.
Ah.
Yeah, and I think for people like myself who are like, "You gonna tell me what to do?" It's hard because
People like
I live
myself.
in the
By
Triggered.
people like
I li
myself, she means
I
she means people
woo,
who tell people
triggered
what to do.
because I was like, "You are not gonna tell me I can't." And I think that the control aspect is a thing for me. And I also think, and I'm sure many people who are listening, and I think the another part is how do you know what you need? I
Mm,
sometimes feel like I'm on a delayed reaction. And so I sometimes don't know what I need until I'm like, oh, maybe I needed that. But it's hard to kind of speak to that in the moment.
mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's a practice, right? Like needs are connected to feelings,
Yes.
and folks who are marginalized in all types of way,
Mm,
whether that be people of color, whether that be women, whether you're at the intersection of being a
yeah.
black woman, whatever it is, right? We are actually very good at delaying making that connection between like the thing that the feeling that is happening right now, what I need, and doing something about it. In some ways it's a superpower. Like something wild is happening right now, but I'm just gonna sit here and smile and nod, and I'll talk about it later with my homegirls, or I'll talk about it later with my family, right? But I'm not going to react in that moment. I'm not going to fully connect even to the feeling of it in my body, because that would create a different sort of response. And
Mhm.
it's not safe, or it's not quote unquote professional or whatever is, the societal judgment, right? Like we can't do that in the moment. So we learn over time to kind of push those things down until it is a safe space, until we have time to process it. But in some ways, then we have that kind of disconnect or that delay in our needs. And that's not
Yeah.
obviously everyone, but a good amount of people operate in that way to kind of make it through the day. So on the one hand, it's really
That's
helpful,
me. That's
but
me.
mhm,
Right.
That's really that's so interesting because what that I think what that leads to sometimes too is like on the boundary and the rule conversation, like you've let something go a few times because it's just like,
mm,
getting to exactly what you're saying is like you push it down, and then you're finally like, no, I'm done. And like if it doesn't come out as set emotion, angry, upset, whatever, it could
right.
also come out just as a rule because you're like, what you're not going to do is you're not going to treat me this way, right? So it's like that you can see how
Mhm,
it can quickly go to like push down, push down, push down to then it's all about someone else when it's not,
mhm.
and it's really about you, right?
Right. And that's not to say that because we don't want to like ignore context,
Sure.
right? Like
Right.
obviously like people can be doing things that are not okay to
Right.
us and we can ask for what we need in those ways. We can make those requests, we can make those rules. Absolutely. But in terms of then what happens next, right? Like I say to someone, what you're not going to do is talk to me in X, Y, and Z type of way, and then they continue to talk to me in X, Y, and Z type of way, the boundary that I have, what I have control over is how I respond to that. Whether that's removing myself from the situation or bringing somebody else in or, whatever it is, right? Like that's the piece that I have control over. And so that's where I'm going to focus my boundary. I want to be talked to kindly is
Mhm.
my
Mhm.
boundary, right?
Mm.
Mhm.
And that looks a certain type of way. But if people can't do
Mhm.
that, then I can remove myself from situations where that's not
Yeah.
happening versus trying to convince someone in the moment when they're talking to me in a way that does not align with that to do something different.
Right.
And it depends also on the situation, right? Like you
Yeah.
might engage further if it's a family member versus if it's a coworker or a random stranger on the street or whatever. Like all of it has nuance, but
Yeah.
Yeah.
really trying to frame it in that what is it that I need in this
Yeah.
moment? What is the boundary that I have? Because that makes it then clear how we respond or don't respond or whatever happens next.
I love that positive spin on it too. It's like even the difference between like I want people to talk to me kindly versus what people aren't going to do is talk to me sideways is such a
Hmm.
is
Yeah.
such a better way of like really to your point getting in touch with like that what do I actually need and what do I want right now.
And it gives, in theory, other people somewhere to go, right?
Mm,
Like if I give you just like, don't do this, it is much
Mm.
harder to follow that. And it brings up different feelings for those of us that have feelings about control versus like, I would like this type of treatment, right? Like you are giving people a way in
right.
if they would like to continue to connect with you versus pushing them out.
Right. Oof, that's a word. I love that.
How do you it's funny because I feel like I've evolved and over time and it was therapy that helped me get to a place, I may go extreme like you are not going to talk. I may be that person, right?
I mean, we all do.
I
Yes.
mean, I'm there, right? I mean, I have a hard time going, you're not, the nice part, but how and when, for people who are listening, how and when is it time to go
Mm,
to kind of seek help? I think for me, it was when I felt too overwhelmed by the
mm.
situation or I wasn't able to regulate and relationships started kind of cracking and I was like, you know what, I need to seek help and I needed to learn. There's a I think I've said there's a book that I went to. It's like a basically a workbook on how to create boundaries. And I went through that with a therapist. So I'd love to hear the when and the how.
The when of when to go to therapy or the when
Yeah,
of when
when
to
do
set
you
boundaries?
know? When do you know it's time to kind of get help and support?
Yeah, I mean, I think you gave great examples when you're noticing maybe that your relationships, patterns in relationships that don't feel good, or they're not kind of playing out the way that you would like them to. When you're noticing that feelings or thoughts that you're having are impacting other parts of your life, right? So we think about like what are the limitations or kind of the impacts on daily life activities, on daily life functioning, when your sleep is being impacted,
Mm.
when it's impacting how hungry you are, when it's impacting your energy level, or how quickly you are popping off at somebody or not, right? Like you have a what is for you normal kind of emotional capacity, and you notice maybe that that has shrunken for you in some ways. Those are all great ways, or just something that you're really having trouble working through yourself, whether that be a question about identity or a relationship or anything. I don't think that there's like a wrong time to go to therapy. I think sometimes people think like, okay, therapy is for crisis. And
Mm.
certainly therapy is for crisis, but it's also for a bunch of moments before crisis
Yeah.
and a bunch of things that might not even rise to crisis level, but are impacting you in some way.
Yeah. I love that because I think for many, including myself, I'm the queen of the crisis therapist that and it's usually and it actually has been centered around boundaries. It has been centered around
Mm,
me learning how to say no, learning how to build that muscle. And it's usually whether it's a job that's I'm being crushed under and not
mm,
knowing how to get out, or it's a relationship that those moments I'm thinking about that I sought help. And I appreciate your point about that you don't have to just wait till those moments in order to get
hmm.
the necessary support.
Yeah.
Oftentimes it's easier to get support when we're not in crisis,
Yeah.
before we're really like, this is, I'm on the edge of cussing somebody out.
Right.
Like,
Mm.
I feel
easier to talk about it before we get to that moment.
that's when I started therapy. I feel like this is like come back like a million times in therapy, but I started therapy like when I saw something on the horizon, like the
Mm,
anticipatory piece, like, oh, this thing is going to come up and I don't think I'm going to be able to handle it. And even now, because I don't go to my therapist now every week, but now I can definitely like forecast, like, and I'll text her, like, hey, girl, in 3 weeks, I'm going to need 3 weeks back to back to back because
hmm,
this is coming. So I feel like therapy has actually made me get better at that, is like feeling like
mm,
identifying because even though I anticipated it when I first started therapy, I've never been back to that space, right? It was still like I
mm,
was in crisis. I just didn't realize I was like in crisis yet. Whereas now I can identify that like 5 steps before because of therapy, because
hmm,
I understand the physical pieces of it and I start to notice my behaviors and all the things you were saying. But I think it's important to point out that it isn't always when you're in crisis. Like sometimes it is, you're thinking like, uh-oh, I may be going there and I'm not going to be able to do this by myself.
hmm. Or you just don't want to.
Right.
Sometimes they're just like, I just need some support in this thing, and I don't feel comfortable talking about it with other people, or, I'm still in this moment, and whatever. I have all these other feelings about it that I don't want to keep sharing with other people over and over again. A lot of that comes up with grief,
Mm.
where folks feel like the people around them think that they should have moved on already,
Right.
and we know that
Mm.
that's not how grief works, and so that feels
Right.
really lonely, right? So having a space where it's like, yeah, we can talk about this week after week after week after week for however long you need
Right.
to, and that's fine. That's why you're here. A lot with relationships and breakups is
Mm,
another big one, where it's like people have these thoughts that like, I should be over this already. It's like, well, you either are or you aren't. Sounds like you're not. So
right.
let's keep talking about it, right? So those pieces where we might feel judgment from other people is another good one. I was gonna say, oh, I really like what you said too, and I know you said this last episode about like feeling the things in your body
Mm,
as well, because hopefully we would have learned at some point that we do have or hold feelings in our bodies, but I think a lot of people kind of disconnect from that, or like I was saying before, right, like do that on purpose, or kind of subconsciously as a survival strategy. But oftentimes I'll have folks come in and say like, oh, like, yeah, I've been, crying every day before work, or other things like throwing up,
Mm.
right? Or
Mm,
like, yeah, like I get to work and I'm sitting in the car and like my stomach hurts. Or I go into these certain things and I'm like sweating profusely. Like all of those things are also indications that like something is happening
Yeah.
in our bodies. Getting headaches every day, right? That are stress
headaches.
headaches are a big one. Yeah. And we know that Black women are more likely to report the somatic symptoms, the things that are happening in our bodies related to mental health, than some of the others. And sometimes because we just can't name them, we don't have a name for them, and you need somebody to say like, oh, that's anxiety actually,
That's
or yeah, stress, all the things, depression,
mhm.
right? And sometimes because it doesn't feel safe to name them in that way. But I can talk about the stomach ache that I have, or this
Mm.
like series of stomach aches that I have, right? That feels like an easier way to connect with other people without it being stigmatizing, but
Just
recognizing that, yeah, those things are connected.
all of that. All of that is me. All of that is me. No, I will say that there have been many moments in which I'm like, wow, I just have my stomach just hurts. And I used to just not put a and maybe I just didn't put a definition on it because I didn't want to say I have anxiety attacks, right? Or what, maybe headaches or little things that and I think for me when I said earlier, I won't manifest stress externally.
Mm-hmm.
It all comes out of my body.
Mm-hmm.
Everything, all of a sudden my face is numb and I'm like, okay, maybe I'm stressed. Maybe this is
Mm-hmm.
anxiety. And I think that for me it's probably a defense mechanism
Yeah.
as you're saying.
Yeah.
It's the
Mm-hmm.
way in which I sort of it just manifests itself.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And
It's
if for me to
helpful
say
in some ways.
right, right. If for
Mm-hmm.
me to say, you know what, I'm really stressed that you said this, that would take a lot of vulnerability.
Mm-hmm.
That it's easier to go, you know what, my stomach hurts.
Yeah.
Uh,
Mm-hmm.
It's so bad. It's funny. It's like the worst, but like when people compliment me and say, like, you're so calm under pressure,
mm, me too.
it is really, really hard for me to hear because I am not calm
Mm-hmm.
under pressure. And so what that says to me is like, I've taught myself to hold everything inside, and people outside are thinking I'm calm and I'm in a full panic. And I
Mm-hmm.
realize that like that whenever I hear it, it's super triggering for me because I'm like, they're like, oh, you're just so calm. You bring a sense of calm. And I'm like, oh, great. So now I'm not only like, I'm like absorbing all of the like anxiety and I'm just like taking it all on myself. Not only like myself, but then I'm holding it and hiding it from you all too, which is terrible.
Mm. Is it
Anyway,
though?
that's a whole nother
Oh,
episode probably.
is
I
it
mean, I
though?
don't
I
know,
like
maybe
that
it isn't.
question.
I feel like it's bad. I'll tell you why I think it's bad because I
Okay.
wish that like one, I mean, there's certainly like a piece of it that's like that's performative, right? So people aren't
Mm-hmm.
actually seeing who I really am. So it's also important that other people
Mm,
feel like I'm not just showing up and I'm calm and you're not and like I'm better than you, right? Like that there is a performative piece to it. But I guess there's also like I don't know, maybe it's a like a learned behavior that suits me well also and like my work and things like that. But it's the emotional side that gets me because I'm like, I can't believe I'm letting myself take all this on and everyone thinks I'm fine and I'm not.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. I think, and I like, I say that, right, because I really firmly believe that there aren't any like bad or good behaviors.
Okay.
I think that we have
mm,
behaviors that we have learned that were helpful at some point. Some are still helpful now and some are not.
Mm.
And so like a lot of the therapy that I'm doing is like, well, let's like make that thing plain, right? Like let's talk about what is that behavior? Why do we do that? When does that come up? Do we want to keep that, or is there a
Mm.
way in this stage of life that would be more helpful? But I that comes up a lot, right? Like when we start to notice the things that we do, we immediately go to this place of being like, yeah, why am I doing that? Like that's stupid. Like
Huh.
all of these kind of negative things about ourselves and our behaviors, when like
Hmm.
whatever we have done has probably gotten us to this point.
Right.
Yeah.
And
It
so we
serves
can,
us, right? It
it
serves us.
serves us, or it
Or
has
it
served
has.
us, and maybe we haven't figured out how to
Yeah.
shed it yet. Perhaps because we don't have an appropriate replacement, or perhaps, because it doesn't feel safe to do so, or like whatever the thing is, like there's a
Yeah.
reason for it. But yeah, I don't know, things can be more nuanced
Uh-huh.
than that. And I think it's important to recognize
It's okay.
Yes.
these things were
Right.
helpful.
Right.
I was doing
Yeah.
what I needed to survive and advance and
Mhm.
be that girl in all these
Right.
spaces where you say something in a tone that is a little bit different than normal, and all of a sudden you're being categorized as histrionic or the angry
Mm.
black woman
Right.
or whatever it is. So
Right.
Mm.
Oh, thank you for neutralizing
Yeah.
me. Look at This just
Yes.
like brought me
And
down.
it's please. We need this session every day. No, I will say I'm opposite. Once again, we're opposite on different things because I have often, you never let them see you sweat. I have
mm,
often been like, "Ooh, you are in some," I've spent my whole career in high stress situations. And yes, my stomach may hurt, but I pride myself in hopefully not showing that. And I'm okay with that because I don't need you to see my weakness. We're not friends like that. I don't need you to
mm,
I don't need you to hold my hand. I have people in my life that I will share all of my stress for 3 hours with and they'll listen to it. But I see Jessica's point in which sometimes those things can, particularly as a Black woman, you're always assumed
Yeah.
to be the strong one in the room.
Yeah.
mhm,
But I think what it is too, actually, is it's not that I don't take pride in it. I take shame. The shame piece, I'm so glad you said it. It's more of I feel shame uh,
mm,
in turn, like I shame myself about it. So it's not like I like people thinking that, but then I have that like
right.
internal moment after where I'm like, oh my God, like, what? So I do, and I don't even realize that I'm shaming myself, but I am. And I always talk about this. Like, I never really understood shame because I thought it meant like saying like really bad things to yourself. And I just like never did it. But I do things like this all the time. They go, oh my gosh, Jessica, see, they're saying this, and that's not really how you felt. And that, so it is shame.
And so many of us
Yeah.
do. And
Yeah.
I know the last episode y'all were talking about like the influences that we have from our family or when we're
Right.
young, like there are a lot of things that are passed down that in some ways are helpful. And I'm never going to be one to pathologize the Black family, right? But like
Mm.
coming from the lineages that we have come from and the things that folks just a couple generations back were up against, like you had to be in line. We didn't have time to be acting out or acting up or like all of the things, right? These were real life and death safety issues for my grandparents and my great grandparents. And so some of these things that we learned very quickly as children about what it meant to be quiet and,
Mm.
invisible in some ways, right? Like maybe haven't served us as well
Mm.
in
Mhm.
adulthood.
Yep.
But again, like perhaps even came from a loving place of trying to make sure that we all made it to adulthood
Right.
when you're up against so much. And I think that ties into that other piece of like you were saying about, coming from Caribbean background or different backgrounds, right? The things that are like
Mhm.
for young people or for Americans. I think there's a lot of that piece that psychology has not done a good job of kind of messaging or unpacking yet in a way that resonates with people where it's like, no, we're talking about you too. But there hasn't been enough context. And so it feels kind of self blaming when it's like, no, because why would you share how you're feeling in spaces that you don't feel safe in?
Right. Right.
Exactly
Testify.
like Tanya was saying. We need spaces that we feel safe to
Yes.
be able to unpack, also like Tanya was saying, right? But maybe it's not with your colleagues
Right.
or whatever it is, and that's okay.
Well, that leads
No.
me into the thinking about when you're finding a therapist and when you're finding someone like, we talked about just how with you, of just how important kind of shared lived experiences or exposure to your lived experiences
Hmm.
is, not necessarily you share an experience with your therapist, but
Yeah.
can you talk just about, obviously that's what a lot of your work is focused on, but just kind of the benefits for people looking for a therapist who understands kind of their story and their experience.
Yeah. I love this question because it is so much of the work that I am interested in doing, that I'm doing, is just hopefully helping people to recognize that therapy is not one size fits all. And sometimes, you have an experience and it truly is just the therapist. It just wasn't a good fit. And I say that because I hear people message me or, DM me or whatever in these different spaces and are like, yeah, like therapy is not for me, right? And maybe that's true for someone. I haven't met them yet, though, where like just across the board, that's not the case. Maybe that type of therapy wasn't for you. Maybe that therapist wasn't for you. But if you're interested in something, there's enough variety there. I think that folks can get their needs met with the right resources. So I guess when I'm thinking about looking for a therapist or someone kind of asked me about it, recognizing that there are different types of therapists and there are different types of therapies, I think is really like a kind of baseline crucial thing. People sometimes get very, including me, overwhelmed by the variety of folks with their different titles and the acronyms and all of the things, right? But if I was going to say, like, here's the one thing to focus on, I think it would be the type of therapy and how much you connect with the therapist. So some therapies are more talk based. They look maybe more like what we think therapy will look like in terms of like you talk, the therapist listens. But there are also ones that the therapist plays a more active role. There's ones where you do like homework. There's ones where that happen in a group format. All of those things. And so those are the types of questions that I might be asking a therapist about.
Mm.
What type of therapy do you do? And they'll give you something and you're like, I don't know what that is because I don't know anything about that. But that follow-up question of what does that look like?
Yeah.
What does a typical session look like? Maybe what happens if I don't agree with something that you said? Those are the sorts of questions that I would want to know
Yeah.
if I was looking for a new therapist. And then also you can ask them straight up, like, what is your experience and familiarity working with whatever is the thing that is bringing you to therapy, whatever
Mm.
you feel like is most important. Because, like you said, for some people, kind of having that identity match
Yeah.
feels most important for them to be comfortable. And for other people, it might be that they're coming for a specific reason, whether that be, wanting to talk about a childhood experience or to talk about a trauma that they
Right.
experienced or to talk about relationship. And they really want to make sure, or like a particular diagnosis, they really want to make sure that the therapist has some familiarity and expertise in that thing.
Right.
And there's not really a wrong way to go about it, but just to kind of have thought about those things before can be helpful. Because sometimes we
Yeah.
won't be able to find someone who meets all of our criteria, but if we have like our top 2 or 3, hopefully we can find someone who meets those.
Breaking up with a therapist is hard.
So hard.
And I will say that for people who have struggled with boundaries and saying no, it's like I know that I've been to a therapist that I knew wasn't working for way too long, and I just didn't know how to say this doesn't work for me. I mean,
Oh, same.
therapist, their feelings are not going to be hurt, right? I mean, like tell us, you free us all.
No, no, absolutely not. And it's so funny that you say that because same. Like
Okay.
I can see the therapist clearly,
Mm.
Whew,
right? I was like, oh girl, you're a nice lady,
you ain't
but
the
you are
one.
not the therapist for me. And it took me however long, who I honestly can't say, but way too long to like just be like, okay, this is enough. I'm gonna find someone who is a better fit. And I think that's for a couple reasons. One is like it is really hard and scary to go about finding a new
Oh my
therapist.
God.
People are busy. You got to talk to people about like things that are potentially really hard for you, like the scheduling, the logistics. You're already potentially not at your best, and that's why you're coming. Like
Right.
it's so hard.
Girl.
And then you're like, well, at least I already like know this lady, she's good enough,
Right.
but it could be great. I think like if there's one thing that like folks take away, like when you have that therapist, like it could be magic. It
It
could
could
be
be, right?
all the things.
I feel like
I
it's
remember my wife. I Oh no,
oh,
you
I
go.
was just gonna say, like, I'd never online dated because it was before my time or after my time dating, but I feel like it was like when I was looking for my therapist, it was like, okay, well, are they gonna I left like 50 messages and I'm like, well, are they gonna call me
Ugh,
back? Are they not calling me back
stress.
because of me? Am I being like, did I tell them something? And then they're like, oh no, no, no. This is like way too much for me. I was so stressed. I was like, oh my God, this is
It
insane.
was. I
Definitely
remember
identify.
during the pandemic, I was seeing someone and it was virtual. And I just remember my wife finally saying, "Is she working for you?" And I said, "No. Why are you going to her? Why are you doing this?" And I just was like, "Well, I don't, she's really nice."
Right.
But it was like, it was so clear to even her. She's like, "You are getting nothing out of this. And you are still driving me crazy during the pandemic. So I'm going to need you to find somebody new."
Right.
And
Find
it was,
somebody else. Yeah.
please. But yeah, so I think that, freeing people that it's okay to say, this does not serve me.
Right.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it is, yeah, it shouldn't hurt your therapist's feelings. Like this is a job. Obviously, I build very deep relationships with clients and I love working with clients. And I feel really lucky to be in a position where I have some control over who I work with. And, I do consults for folks. We talk about their issues. We talk about kind of what's bringing them in, like just kind of do a vibe check, right? Because I
Yeah.
also don't want to work with people that I'm not going to be a great fit with
Right.
because it's tough.
Yeah.
And that's not based on, the content. Most of my clients are folks who have been through very intense traumas,
Mm,
childhood sexual abuse, domestic violence, rape, like all those types of things. But the ones that feel the toughest for me are when we are just not aligned just in the feeling, in the vibe, right? Like I am
mm,
not the right therapist for everyone, and I know that. And
right.
I'm not trying to be the right therapist for everyone. And I have to if I have to put on something that I'm not to try and be the therapist that you need, I already know it's not going to work out.
Right.
But the people that I am the right therapist for, like it's great.
How long
It's
do you
great and I love it and hopefully they love
how
it.
long so you do a consultative, like, call. How long
Mhm.
are you, like, suggesting people not necessarily with you, but how long are you suggesting people are doing this vibe check? Because like, the first time you don't wanna like
15, 20 minutes.
but
15, 20
but if
Oh,
you
minutes
don't feel
is the
the vibe
consult.
then, do you do
Oh, I
a
see.
session?
2 to 3 sessions,
Okay,
I'd say.
okay.
okay.
Yeah, I think there is a piece that we have to be honest about with
Right.
ourselves, right? That's like, well, why am I coming in?
Mhm.
And is it the therapist that I don't like, or is it the things that they're saying that I don't
Mm,
like?
Right,
Because
yes.
sometimes that comes up too. Hopefully, you've
right.
built a strong enough relationship with your therapist where y'all can work through that. But yeah, sometimes that happens as well, where people are like, yeah, the therapist was, you know, saying X, Y, and Z, and you're like, well, right? Like talk to a friend, and they're like, the therapist was telling me that
Right.
I don't set boundaries and X, Y, and Z,
And you're like,
and you're
what?
like, well,
That might be the
hmm,
right one. That might be the good
That
therapist.
might be your match.
right,
Yeah, maybe
right,
that actually
It
probably be
might.
better, like, having your friends interview your therapist and being like, "Yeah,
That's true.
literally.
this one is right for you."
There's some people I've wanted to fire, and people are like, "Girl, you need to go back. You need to go back. You
They're
need to
speaking
go
truth
back."
to you.
Go back and hear that again,
Right.
okay?
Yeah,
Yeah,
give
but
it a
I think
chance.
feeling safe in the relationship to be able to
Yeah.
say like, "Ooh, I'm having some feelings about that thing that you just said."
Mm,
Yeah.
Right, is so
Mm,
important across the board. Or like, I left the session and I was like, I don't know if I'm gonna go back because I'm gonna be honest, that felt a little too close to home. Like
ooh,
that felt a
mm,
little too raw, right? Like that is really where so much of the work happens,
mm,
is being able to be vulnerable in those types of ways that we aren't as vulnerable with other folks as maybe we
yeah.
could be or we need to be, and learning how to do that and not having someone else's feelings kind of
yeah,
then be triggered by what's said.
right. Oh, that's really interesting. I haven't actually had that experience, but that's interesting that, like, yeah, by saying, like, "This thing really got to me that you said," like, that actually helps your therapist because they're now understanding, like, the whys and whats of, like, what's turning you on, what's getting you in a place, right? That's interesting. I've
Mhm.
never tried that. Maybe I
Yeah.
should try it.
And sometimes the therapist is wrong. Like, we are
Right.
human. We are not infallible. Sometimes you say
Right.
something, sometimes I say something, and I'm like, why did I say that? Like, that was just, it doesn't hit the way that you thought
Right.
it
Yeah, yeah.
did, or the words don't come out right.
Right.
Like, we are human beings,
Yeah.
but the whole point of therapy is that it is not about my stuff. I am not going to burden you with whatever is happening with me. Like, you can say anything to me and we will work through it. And I will be emotionally regulated enough to handle it. That is my job. Oof.
Mm.
And I've spent a lot of years getting really good at that job. Right. So, yeah, I do like,
Emotionally
Yeah,
regulated. I
girl.
love that.
mhm.
Emotionally regulated.
Tell you what, my
That's
career,
goals.
yeah, I was gonna say that in my career goals, maybe my
That is
emotional goals.
not okay. Maybe it is a
Well,
goal, but
yeah, no, maybe it's.
okay.
I sorry, I shouldn't have said it's not my career goals. It's not my ministry right now.
It's
Today,
not your ministry.
today,
Not
not
today.
today.
Not today.
Mhm.
Can you share with us a little bit about therapy while black and why you started it and a little bit about that?
Yeah. So therapy while black was kind of something that I had thought about for a while, but launched in 2020
Ooh,
in all amidst all of the context. In part because I really just felt like my community is really struggling, having a lot of feelings, and don't necessarily, depending on your background or just like all sorts of things, like feel like we have resources or feel like we can connect with people. And stigma is very real. Like, you think about therapy, you see therapy depicted in all of these spaces, and there's better representations now, right? But you think about like the older white man and you like laying on the couch, right? Like,
wouldn't be
that
me.
is a type of therapy, right? Right. But exactly, having that response, we were like, oh, well, that's not for me. So, okay, right. Then therapy is not for me. And so, couple goals. One is really just to like familiarize people with these different kind of ideas about therapy, to talk about therapy, to make it known that Black people do therapy both as therapists and as clients, right? Like, this is also for us, and also be really real about the ways that it is not, or that it hasn't been, or that it's harmed us, or like just have more conversation about what it means to be participating in these spaces as a therapist and as a client, being in a black body, right? And like operating in potentially non-black spaces. Because I was hearing so many people like really struggling. I can't get out of bed. Like, noticing huge changes in their eating, thinking about death and dying, but not feeling like therapy or mental health services are for them. And then you have like all of the ways that those things interact with, other systems, with child protective services, with police, with like all of, like, it's just a lot. And I don't think that psychology has done a good job of grappling with those things historically.
Yeah.
Like, it just felt like there haven't been spaces for us. And so, I don't know, I wanted people to feel like it was more familiar, or to feel like it could be for them. Maybe not every space, maybe not every therapist, but like, we don't all look like that. We don't all talk like that. Some of us
I
have
love it.
I love that you're supporting people who
all
are
the
in
things.
therapy, but also practitioners and people who are in the field, because that's so important too for people to feel seen and heard and be able to share their experiences with other people who are having similar experiences. I think that's really. I'm going to send you to my therapist. I'm going to send your links to my therapist in case she doesn't have them already. She's probably like, "Girl, stop sharing
Absolutely.
resources with me."
Right. Right. Nobody needs you. She's like, nobody needs your
It's like,
resource.
"Got it. I'm sharing it."
But yeah, I mean, on both sides, like, I'm sure I have certainly had the experience of looking for a black therapist, and I am in
Yeah.
California, right? And like,
It's hard, by the
Girl,
way.
right, right.
I
It's
got a
really a
good
Really
one.
needle
hard.
in a haystack type of thing. And so, like, recognizing that experience too, it's like less than, 5% or something of psychologists are black, like, same with other fields, right? The numbers they're low. They're very low, and there's so many barriers
Mhm.
to being a fully licensed clinician. But I don't know, we just need more community around it. And then the other piece of the work is like, I do trainings for non-black clinicians around kind of cultural responsiveness. I teach
Love it.
a master's level class to clinicians in training about working with Black women, right?
Oh,
So it's become kind of this thing that is really kind of education based in different ways because we just deserve better,
Ooh,
I think.
yes.
yes,
Can I
girl.
just woof? You got
Ooh.
me. You had me at that because we deserve
We do deserve
better. I
better.
think I was just saying that
Yep.
earlier to Jessica.
Yep.
That we deserve to be treated better. And I love that for not you're training non-black people on how to support their clients. And I think that it's such a valuable resource
Right.
and need because I know that I have sat on many a chair and been spoken to in a way that I was like, okay, you don't
Mhm.
understand my experience.
Right.
Yeah, same. My first like therapy experience was absolutely like that. It was like the second or third session, and she was like, "Well, you just need to set more boundaries with your mom." And I was like, "Okay, well, I won't be coming back." It was
Thanks.
nice to meet you,
Right.
right? Like
Right.
there is just so much there. Like I need to feel like you at least understand my context when you say something like set boundaries in a culture that is traditionally more collectivist,
Mm,
like before I'm willing to hear you out.
right. Right.
And if you don't understand, then like, you might as well be speaking a different language because I'm not
Right.
taking it in.
Right.
Right.
Ooh.
Right. Well, I know we definitely want to wrap up, but I wanted to ask one more question. In this climate that we are in
Mm,
which we are all feeling that whether it's Jessica needing boundaries for the election or that we all are just bombarded by so much information and feeling torn down, what advice do you have for people who are struggling
mm.
to set those boundaries and just find joy?
I think my word was going to be joy. So I'm glad that you brought that in. I think especially in these sorts of moments, it can feel like the way to be responsible and respectful of all of the oppression and people's kind of negative experiences that are happening is to continually be bearing witness, but in this way that is like completely all encompassing. And there has to be balance. There has to be joy. There has to be moments for us to feel good and to recharge, and to recognize that it is on all of us, but it is not on any of us kind of individually, and
Mm,
that we are a part of the beloved community, right? Like we are a
yeah.
part of the communities that we are wanting to support and fight for and advocate for. And to do those things, we also need to be well. So yeah, finding a joy practice of some sort,
Mm,
I think is really important. I think the other thing that I want to say, I realize I haven't said, but I usually say, is that I really think about boundaries as a way to connect with people.
mm,
And I think we often see them as like a way to distance ourselves. But the
mm,
reality is that if I am not feeling safe and secure in a relationship, you are not getting the
mm,
best version of me. You are not getting the vulnerable version of me. You might not get any of me because I've created distance or put up walls, right? But if I am able to be vulnerable about what I need, then I can invite you into the space. I can say, I actually can't right now talk about the election, but we can talk about other things versus me ghosting you until the election is over because I am dysregulated and
all my
triggered.
friends, all of my friends,
Tanya's circle.
my circle. No one's calling me
Right.
back. No, it's just
Right. Like I'm feeling big things and I can't handle it, but I also like don't know how to
yeah,
express that to you.
Right.
Right. So like
right,
it is my way to say, this is what I can do. Here is how I can do it.
yeah,
Yes.
I would like to invite you
yeah,
into
Mm,
where I'm at.
yeah.
yes.
And me not judging those who choose because I'm like, dude, you know, this is the most important election of
Right.
our lifetime,
Right.
and we all may be on
Right.
fire. But I can say, you know, that I have tried to I am respecting folks' boundaries,
Mm.
but I am internally in my
Resenting them.
own. Maybe I need to call a therapist.
Or maybe, I
Call
mean,
a
I think
friend.
like the need that you have is to be in community with people who have more
Yes.
capacity for action right now.
Yes, that's
Right?
me.
And so, like,
That's
if
me right
that's
now.
the need,
Yes.
then, like, yeah,
Put
finding
that.
the people who wanna have those conversations and who
Yeah.
can have those conversations
Yes, girl.
versus the people who are
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
"I'm 2 seconds away from,
N
being flat out on the floor,
Right.
and I really can't take
Right.
anymore right now."
Right.
Right. And my
Yeah.
capacity is not everybody
Right.
else's
Fi
capacity. I have a
Exactly.
higher
Yeah.
capacity
Find a
than the
Reddit
average.
thread.
No, I don't do that.
Not your
But
not your
yes,
friend who's leaving the country because she
no.
doesn't have the capacity to be here for 3
Right. But
weeks.
and you know, and as someone, I have a huge community and I have a lot of community who are relying on me for positivity to
Oh,
keep
I
them
thought you meant
going,
the
which is funny.
news, relying on you for the news.
No. So relying on those people who want the information versus
Mm.
those who are not, you know, strong enough. No, I'm just joking.
And I think the other
She was
piece
doing
I so
so well. She was doing
I
so
was.
I
well.
I'm just
I
gonna
fell.
gloss over
I
that
fell.
Yeah.
actually. I'm just gonna
I
keep going.
fell.
I have like some videos on I think Instagram and TikTok and whatever talking about like a framework for setting boundaries. The first part is kind of being able to acknowledge like what the thing is that's kind of triggering this, whether that be something that a person said or something that they did. The next part is being able to name for ourselves what feeling is coming up.
Mm,
And so one of the things I'm hearing, right, is like for you, there's this sense of urgency.
right.
Like, this is a really big deal. This is a really big moment. This is a big thing. Maybe there's fear. Maybe there's all these other things that then like drive the response.
Yes.
And so being able to recognize that that is happening hopefully means that we can figure out like what do you
Yeah.
need to get those needs met.
Right.
That maybe is not
Yeah.
sending 8 million articles
Yeah.
to,
You
friends or
know, you
whatever,
know what?
right?
I love this. I love that I just got a therapy session. I need to send you send me a
Yeah.
bill. Just send me But
This I talk about all the time online because it's
I
like,
love
yeah, how
that.
do you do that? How do you do that well? So it's like, yeah, acknowledge what they said, figure out what the feeling is, be able to talk about what the feeling is. If we're really like trying to be vulnerable and invite people in, let them know what you can do and then offer some alternatives.
Mm,
Again, like that connection piece, right? So, like, I'm feeling really anxious about next week and what's going to happen after. This is what I am doing for myself about it. It sounds like maybe some energetic practice, right? Like I am taking nightly walks right now because by the end of the day, my body is like
right.
buzzing with all of the kind of anxious energy.
Maybe I can find you
I'm
someone
hearing,
who's really active online that you could partner with. Maybe I could send it to you and say, Tanya, I see that you have a lot of things you want to talk about at, you know, Kamala for president, 123 also wants to talk a
mhm.
lot about this. Perhaps you should call her.
While I appreciate the resources, you know, I'm good. I will be calling North Carolina next week and
Perfect.
There
talking
you
to
go.
them.
Perfect.
But no, but Kayla, we are so
Thank you
grateful.
so
We are
much.
we
I
are
love
so
this. This was
grateful.
so fun. Thanks for having
Appreciate
me.
you. Appreciate all of the tips, and we will be sharing many of the resources that you shared with us. And we all need a Kayla right now. I
Yes.
think we need more engagement, more therapy, more conversations, and
Yes.
more dialogue and more freedom to share these things. And so, truly appreciate you and the work that you're doing.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank y'all. This was great. This was so fun. Thanks for having me, and I appreciate it.
And if my therapist hears that, that means we need to book for the next like 3 to 4 months. We need to just start getting those on the calendar. Exactly. Hey, it's Jessica. Thanks for listening to Girl Call Me. If you have something to add or a story to share, come on over to Instagram or Facebook and join the conversation. Also, make sure you follow and subscribe Girl Call Me. You don't want to miss when we release new episodes. Thanks for listening.